Coming up, we have bee enthusiast Clancy Lister, who's going to give us a deep dive into the importance of native bees. But first, here's King Stingray with Day Off.
You're listening to Triple R. That was Day Off by King Stingray. If you're just waking up, good morning. But unfortunately, you just missed a really cool interview with Jim Poulter, who described the traditional 8 seasons that were used by the Kulin Nations. Hey, I don't know about you guys, but I've recently been in my flower era.
In your flower era?
Yeah.
Oh.
Me too. I've been in the garden with my mum heaps.
Really?
Yeah, she's trying to get me in there. I actually love it though.
Your green thumb.
My green thumb, yeah. Yeah, I love getting in the garden actually.
I mean, there's been a few like holidays as well that involves like flowers, getting flowers for your mom, like Mother's Day and stuff
True.
like that. Yeah.
What did I get flowers for? Oh, my girlfriend. Actually, yeah, I got her some flowers the other day. 6 months. Shout out to my girlfriend,
Big
Tori.
6 months.
Congrats.
Yeah.
We are really in our environment era at the moment, guys. And to continue on with that theme, we are joined by Clancy Lister, also known as the Bee Man, who is going to inform, encourage, and promote all things bees. Clancy, welcome.
How's it going, guys?
Welcome, Clancy.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Just your first question here. Can you paint us a picture of how important these little guys are to our ecosystem and what role they play?
Oh, well, yeah, they're so important. So we get pollination from a number of different insects and even things like bats and birds as well. And that's really important for about 80 to 90% of our flowering plant species in the world that will need pollination to produce their fruits and their seeds and to grow into more and keep continuing on. And that's also where we get a lot of our food from, like from our crops that turn into fruits and nuts and berries and different things. So
Cool.
that's obviously incredibly important to both us for food and for life in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see a lot of your content is around these bee hotels. Can you describe what these bee hotels are and what they sort of do?
Yeah, so bee hotels, it's like trying to create more housing in a housing crisis, particularly in a urban environment where there might be lots of flowers and gardens and that sort of thing. But the things that native bees will use to nest in, such as just open clay and sandy soils, or in dead logs and flower stems and different things that are hollow. You can imagine that the second you see a tree branch that falls on the ground that might turn into a dead log, that gets cleaned away, or there's not much bare ground laying around anymore with its all impermeable surfaces. So these bee hotels is something to create housing for native bees. And it's also a really good tangible sort of conservation thing that, kids can get involved in, and it's pretty marketable to reach some ears.
Yeah. I saw this article the other day. I just feel like the narrative around these sorts of things, it was a Herald Sun article, and it was like this lizard was in the way of building homes. But I feel like you could just completely flip that and be like, well, these homes are going in and impacting their the native landscape. Do you think that's like a narrative thing that's also a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually funny you say that, because it's something I made a video about in a bit of outrage, because I read this Herald Sun, and it was titled like "Tiny Little Lizard Getting in the Way of Housing."
It's such a throwaway.
And then I said, Herald Sun, I think you might mean that, like, that is the last place that tiny little lizard actually has housing. Where destroying its.
Exactly right.
It's
bit of a narrative around
backwards,
that.
Yeah. We do need to phrase nature a little bit more positively in our media. So hopefully,
kind of like deforestation as well. Like, we're destroying their homes, but then we're making headlines about like we're running out of room because of all these animals, blah blah blah, which is like really unfair.
Yeah, it's a narrative.
Yeah, but also going back to the bee hotel, what actually makes a good bee hotel?
Yeah, so what actually makes a good bee hotel is the fact that these bee hotels are trying to best mimic the natural places that native bees would nest in the natural environment. So the best way to make a bee hotel is to try and perfectly copy where they'll nest in the natural environment. So things like inside the hollows of pithy stems and flower stems, and inside the holes of wood-boring grubs and different things in dead logs. So a couple of ways to do that is by just creating prunings and clippings of different stems of or pithy things or bamboo or something from the garden, and that can be just some of the simple things that people prune, or the veggies that have reached the end of their life that people put into the green waste can make good bee hotels. Or drilling into hardwood logs, which is usually something that the witchetty grub does. If you listen to Bill before about the seasons and how the Wurundjeri people are actually the witchetty grub people, and so that's how native bees can get tied into that, because they'll nest inside the holes from those wood-boring grubs and beetles. Cool. And then lastly, just making a good mix of like clay and sand and putting that into Besser blocks or bricks or different containers like terracotta pipes or something for the ground nesting bees.
We often hear about honeybees, but native bees tend to get less airtime. What Australian native bees are so unique, and why should we be paying more attention to them?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because we actually have so many different native bees here in Australia. And that's one of the things that tends to blow people's mind, is when they find out just how many species.
Whoa.
So I've got a poster in here that we're currently looking at with some of the characteristic species. So you can see the blue banner bees are on here, the leafcutter bees are on here, the resin bees, the some bees that even look like they're wearing a mask like Iron Man, they're Hylaeus, they're called mast bees.
Wow.
And there's just about every shape and colour that you can think of, there's a native bee species that looks like that. And the European honeybees, they're very important for our pollination of our crops, because you can get so many million European honeybees into a few boxes and ship them to an apple farm or to an almond farm for pollination. But these are the bees that make our natural ecosystems flourish, because our native flowers that have in Australia that have co-evolved alongside these native bees for millions of years, they rely on them for their own pollination and to keep our ecosystems flourishing. So sometimes if you lose some of these specialist pollinators of our native plants, that puts a lot of pressure on those plants to exist without them, and sometimes it's not feasible. So they are very important. There's over 2,000 species of native bees.
For the listeners at home, if you want to have a look up Native Bees of Australia poster, and it'll come up, and it's got bees of all shapes and sizes and colours. That's really cool. I was saying in the intro, you might have heard me talking about getting in the garden with my mum. She's got like a lot of probably more European traditional sort of like agapanthus, sort of those sort of flowers and sort of a pretty typical sort of garden. What are some like indigenous traditional flowers that she can plant that could help these bees as well? Is there a couple that like could help out that are pretty handy?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one of my biggest tips is to either just head straight to your local Indigenous native nursery. So one of the nurseries that has a focus on Indigenous native plants, and just say, load me up with whatever, and they'll probably know the right things to do. But there is resources you can look for online, such as the Ween Bee Foundation Powerful Pollinators Guide, or like the lots of local councils such as the City of Melbourne. I'm sure, where are we here? Are we in Darebin here? Or?
Darebin or Yarra one.
Yeah, they'll have their own local council Indigenous plant sort of list that you can look for. And that's what I definitely try and promote, because especially if we're talking about people being in the garden before, a lot of people are really happy, or a lot of gardeners at the moment are really happy, because we finally had some rain in Melbourne over the weekend. Yeah. And we've had barely any this year. And if you ask someone like your mum, how much she's had to water for those European plants that aren't as adapted to the hot Australian dry climates, their water bill will be going absolutely gangbusters at the moment, because just holding out for that rain. So getting native plants that are more adapted to those conditions will actually help with your water bill, as well as looking after the native pollinators.
If someone in Melbourne wants to get involved, whether it's building a bee hotel, learning more, or supporting your work, where should they start?
I think, they should just start by getting out into nature, connecting with nature, go to your local park and garden, just have a look at what you can see on the flowers, and just build that connection back. And there's obviously, I've got on my handle at Bees and Blossoms, I do put out some educational material about native bees and flowers and different things. yeah, just getting out into nature and getting back in amongst it. We have lost that connection with nature quite often with a lot of people. So getting back involved.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Clancy, for coming in. That's all we've got time for, but appreciate you coming in and giving us all the some tips and knowledge around how important native bees are and the role they play in nature. But yeah, thanks for taking the time to coming in today, mate.
No worries. Thanks, guys. And happy World Bee Day as well.
Oh, happy World Bee Day.
Yeah.
That's such a coincidence that we had you on. Clancy walked in and he was like, International Happy Bee Day. Well, like, we didn't even know that. You're listening to Triple R. That was Clancy Lester talking about the importance of native bees and the roles they play in our ecosystem and how you and I can help these little guys. If you want to learn more, head on over to his Instagram, beesandblossoms.oz.